We're now joined by Dr. Laura Lamb from the Beaumont Research Institute on the Oakland County Megacast. Dr. Lamb, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So how are you? How's your team at the Research Institute?
We are doing very well. Thank you very much, and working very hard.
So for those who are unfamiliar, what research in normal times and now during the pandemic does the Beaumont Research team conduct?
So we have a wonderful team of researchers here that span everything from basic science all the way to clinical and in between. So we have people that do bone research, we have people that do cancer research, neurology, Alzheimer's disease, and our group most of the time works on bladder disorders, actually.
Dr. Laura Lamb with us from the Beaumont Research Institute. Your team recently developed a COVID-19 test that delivers pretty rapid results. Give us some details about how that test is conducted and how speedy those results are.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, our normal day job is actually developing diagnostic tests for other diseases. And so we're very excited that we were able to use our past experience and start developing a test for coronavirus back in late January when it was starting to become a global concern. So the way our test works is you take your sample, whether it's a sample from a nasal swab or spit saliva. It can work in other body fluids if the virus is present, but the respiratory tract seems to be where the virus is present most, so that's the samples that we focused on. And you mix it in a test tube with some molecular reagents, heat it above 100 degrees for 30 to 45 minutes. And at the end of that time frame, if the sample contains virus, it will glow under a UV lamp, whereas if there's no detectable virus present, there won't be any glowing at the end of the under the UV light. So it's a relatively simple test. It's relatively quick, and all the reagents are very inexpensive. And importantly, it doesn't require any expensive medical equipment or machinery in order to run.
Dr. Laura Lamb with us from the Beaumont Research Institute on the Oakland County Megacast. Dr. Lamb, was this new test, was it developed based on previous COVID-19 tests? Was this a completely new concept? How is this specific test that's so delivering such quick results developed?
Yeah, so this is actually based off of our previous research developed for detection of Zika virus. So going back a couple years ago, when Zika was in the news lines, we developed this technique that was previously available called RT-LAMP, and it allowed us to detect Zika virus in urine and serum of patients that were at risk of having infection. So that original process actually took several years to go through the whole process of development. And so because we had that experience back in January when we decided to start developing a test to detect coronavirus, we took that process that took us originally several years and we were able to do it over several months. So it just shows you every time you do research, you're learning, you're expanding, you're building. And so when you go through the process, you can do it a lot faster. I would like to emphasize that this isn't FDA approved yet. This isn't something you can go to the clinic yet. This is research, but we're hopeful that in the future that we can bring this to patients.
So Dr. Lamb, on that note, the results from this test can come in as quick as 45 minutes. Just a few months ago, we were talking about several days, maybe even weeks before you would be able to get the results of your coronavirus test. And this just seems to be so rapid in comparison to that. How has the testing developed over time to allow for speedy tests like this that just a few months ago we didn't think really would be possible?
Yes, so that's a wonderful question, and again, it goes back to research that was actually done in the early 2000s, and just really improving on the reagents that are available, and a wonderful shout out to the larger scientific and medical communities. When this has really been an unprecedented sharing of knowledge. So when the virus first emerged in China, scientists and were sequencing the virus, finding out the RNA sequence for it. on the nucleotide level, and then sharing that freely with the global community of scientists and physicians. And so because there was that really early sharing freely available to the world, we were able to start developing this test before we got our first case in Michigan, to be honest.
Dr. Laura Lamb with us on the Oakland County MegaCast. She is from the Beaumont Research Institute. Dr. Lamb, what sort of challenges did you and your coworkers in the development of this test face?
There's always financial support is always a concern of ours when developing things. Obviously none of these things are necessarily inexpensive. Luckily, we had some philanthropy that we could base this off of. And then one of the other early challenges was, as I mentioned, we worked on this in January before there was really cases within the United States. And so we didn't have clinical samples to initially test this test on. And so what we were doing was we were taking kind of a fake virus, but it wasn't a virus. It was just something that resembled it, and adding it into samples. So that was kind of our initial proof of concept that it did work if the sequence was there in the reaction in the sample. And so then when we started getting cases in Michigan, we were very fortunate that our wonderful reference lab here was able to provide us with some samples that we could actually validate our test on. So with that, we've been able to test it now on clinical samples that are from people that have the coronavirus, and validate that it is a very sensitive test.
Dr. Lamb, I think just like the general public, we've all become so educated on the coronavirus since this pandemic began. And I've been obsessed about watching some of the shows about the difference in the various coronaviruses. The world kind of went through this before. I think it was like the swine flu and the bird flu that were variations of this. So how did that tend to go away, and how could this relate to that?
So you're right that this is not coronavirus refers to actually a family of viruses that are related. It's not necessarily a specific strand, although in the public we use it to refer to the strain that's out there right now. That being said, so MERS, SARS, all of those are coronaviruses that had caused concern before, and they went away. And actually, there's several coronaviruses that cause the common cold. And so if you have a very severe common cold, they might actually test you for those other coronaviruses. I am not a virologist. As I mentioned before, I usually develop diagnostic tests for bladder disorders. And so for me to speculate on why this virus compared to those other related viruses has the staying power, that's not really my area of expertise. But obviously this is here to stay. And so as you guys mentioned wonderfully earlier in your program, taking appropriate precautions for reducing your risk is going to be critical within the next year or so until a vaccine is widely available.
Testing is so important to get people back to work and the economy, going again. So I think one of the things people are having an issue with is so many of these tests are not reliable. We're getting false results. How will this test be different? And what would you say to those employers as well until something does come out that is more reliable?
So this is not your normal day disease that we study in terms of how easy it is to test for. And so trying to develop improved diagnostics is something so many researchers are working on. So I assure you the research community is working very, very hard on addressing these concerns. We compared our test to the gold standard, which is called PCR testing. So that's the test that you typically have to wait a day or two to receive your results back for, because it's, at the end of the day, it's very sensitive and it's the most reliable testing option out there currently. And so that's what we compared our test to. We had about 95% agreement with the tests that were positive by that test. They were also positive by our method. And then the results that were negative by the gold standard, we have about 90% agreement using our method. And that might be because either our test, there was some contamination issue, or it's possible that we have some sensitivity, enhanced sensitivity using our method. That will be the point of figuring out with more research. But yeah, we want to be very careful with any claims about sensitivity. We want to make sure that we're thoroughly validating any tests. And as I said before, to the employers that are struggling to reopen your businesses, we are working very, very hard to help support you in that endeavor, because we are a part of this community. This is going to be a community effort, and we're there to support you. We're doing our best.
Dr. Laura Lamb with us from the Beaumont Research Institute on the Oakland County MegaCast. Dr. Lamb, what are the next steps for this type of test, and how can it be made available for expanded COVID-19 testing in the future, or be available to the public?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, we do not have FDA approval at this point. It's not available to the public. So our next steps are to start to bridge that gap, right? So get our test ready for FDA approval. Right now, the FDA has emergency use authorization, or EAU, approval for diagnostic tests for coronavirus. So that means the process is a lot faster to go through. And then obviously working with manufacturing and developing something that would be end user friendly, because all of our testing has been in a laboratory setting, but at the end of the day, you need to make it so it's user friendly.
Dr. Lamb, anything else you'd like to touch on before we let you go today?
Thank you very much for having me here, and thank you for the work that you're doing, sharing information about this disease and bringing it to people's awareness. Thank you.
We appreciate having you on. Dr. Laura Lamb from the Beaumont Research Institute with us on the Oakland County MegaCast.